And over the next 2 decades, the world would watch the greatest English team go from top tier and turn into an average mid-table team. But the question remains, how did the Glazers pull off the heist of the century? In this video, we're gonna look into what shady tactics the Glazers used to acquire the football club, as well as finding out what role Sir Alex Ferguson played in United's downfall. Let's rewind back to March 2002. A Florida-based businessman named Malcolm Glazer bought a 2.9% stake at one of the world's biggest clubs, Manchester United, for £9 million. By this point, United's shares were freely traded on the London Stock Exchange, and Glazer just became the club's newest shareholder. In England, no one knew who Malcolm Glazer was when he first arrived, but back in America, he was known all too well for the wrong reasons. In 1995, Malcolm Glazer became the owner of an NFL team known as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but here's where it gets devious. After he bought the NFL team, he set his sights on the construction of a 70,000 seat arena, but construction proved to be a lot more difficult than expected. Let me explain. The city officials didn't have the budget for such a massive stadium, but Malcolm was persistent, going as far as threatening city officials that he would relocate the entire team to a completely different city if they didn't adhere to his demands. The city officials, not wanting to risk losing the team, were forced into building the stadium. This was total blackmail, especially considering that the city had to introduce a whole new tax policy just to fund the stadium. But it gets crazier. When the Glazers were handed the stadium after construction, they kept 100% of all ticket sales and paid nothing to the city taxpayers who funded the stadium. This situation alone shows just how far the Glazers were willing to go to get what they wanted. It came as no surprise when United fans were the first ones to raise concerns over the club's new investor. When Malcolm Glazer arrived in England, he played it safe, not drawing too much attention to himself, and slowly set out his plan in action. He gradually began buying more and more of the club's shares, and by October 2004, his stake in the club had risen up to 19%, but he didn't do it alone. He had the help of his sons Joel and Avram Glazer. Together, the Glazer family launched their first takeover bid to the United Board of Directors on October 4th, 2004, and from there, the alarm bells should have started ringing. The payment structure of the deal proposed by the Glazers was truly something unheard of in football. The Glazers proposed a deal using leveraged buyouts. This deal involved using borrowed money to fund the purchase of the club, then transfer the debt from the borrowed capital onto the club itself. The Glazers practically had nothing to lose, and the club would be drowned in debt the moment the deal went through. The United board immediately saw through this shady deal, and just like that, the Glazers' first bid had been rejected. But the Glazers were persistent and weren't gonna give up so easily. They regrouped, continued to buy more and more of the club's shares, and this is the part in our story where we shift our focus to Sir Alex Ferguson. During the Glazers' first takeover bid, many United fans expected the club's most influential figure, Sir Alex Ferguson, to voice his concerns over the club's new aggressive investor, but instead of signaling his stance on the entire issue, Sir Alex Ferguson opted to remain silent over the entire scandal. Ferguson didn't want to get involved in the club's internal issues, but some fans felt that Ferguson had betrayed the club in his refusal to defend United against such a hostile takeover. No one could blame Ferguson for the stance that he took. After all, his main priority was making sure that United win on the pitch. For Ferguson, the goal had always stayed the same: knock Liverpool off their perch, and by the early 2000s, that dream came close to becoming a reality. Off the pitch, Ferguson had a huge passion for horse racing. This hobby led him to building a close friendship with two of United's biggest shareholders, John Magnier and JP McManus, who were heavily involved in horse racing as well. As a token of appreciation for their friendship, the two Irishmen registered the legendary horse named the Rock of Gibraltar under Sir Alex Ferguson's name, and this is where all the problems started. Ferguson believed that he owned the horse and that he was entitled to 50% of the horse's breeding breeding rights worth tens of millions of pounds. But in reality, Magnier and McManus were still the true owners of the horse. Even though the horse had been registered under Ferguson's name, this didn't give him legal ownership of the horse. When Ferguson presented his claim over the horse to the two Irishmen, they were in disbelief. Magnier and McManus believed that Ferguson had no legal rights to ownership of the horse or its breeding rights. The whole situation between these three was a misunderstanding, but things seriously got out of hand when Sir Alex Ferguson threatened to take legal action against the club's biggest shareholders over his claim for the horse. Even though everyone around Ferguson's camp warned him that going against the two Irishmen would prove to be a decision he would regret, the United manager didn't care and instructed his lawyer to file a lawsuit against the Irishmen over the ownership of the horse. Magnier and McManus were baffled that Ferguson would even dare challenge them. The two Irishmen were powerful adversaries who had ties to the Kumor Mafia and weren't gonna take this disrespect lightly. No longer was this just about a horse, but the two now had personal reasons to damage Ferguson's reputation. It all started when the two Irishmen called for an internal investigation on Ferguson's transfer dealings at the club. This investigation began to raise concerns on whether Sir Alex Ferguson and his family had personally gained from United through club-related transfers and agent connections. This investigation presented a potential conflict of interest involving Sir Alex Ferguson and presented to the media ways in which he could have misused his influence around the club. The whole scandal forced Sir Alex Ferguson into answering uncomfortable questions in the media, and the whole situation was a total embarrassment for him. The feud between these three turned into a full-fledged boardroom war. The club may have continued to see success off the pitch, but internally the club was torn apart. But the two Irishmen weren't content on just dragging Ferguson's name through the media. Some reports suggested that the Irishmen wanted Ferguson gone from the club for good. They wanted to hit him where it hurts the most, his career. Insiders believed that Magnier and McManus wanted to garner more influence around the club, so they began acquiring more and more of the club's shares. Their end goal was to garner enough influence to prevent Ferguson from signing a new contract extension, effectively meaning the legendary manager would lose his job. Even though Magnier and McManus tried everything they could to tarnish Ferguson's name, in the end the legendary manager prevailed through. The Irishmen couldn't prove Ferguson of any wrongdoing, and the investigation didn't find him guilty of any misconduct. On top of that, Ferguson was heavily backed by the United Board of Directors, in more particular Sir David Gill, so any attempt to get Ferguson fired would be met with immediate disapproval from the United Board of Directors. The whole situation presented a headache for the two Irishmen. Add the fact that they still had to deal with Ferguson's case for the horse, and it came as no surprise when they finally reached their breaking point. And now we shift our attention back to the Glazers. It's important to remember that while this whole scandal was happening, the Glazers were still buying more shares, and their stake in the club had now risen to 30%. The Glazers saw the tension between the board, Ferguson, and the Irishmen, and that's when everything fell into place. The two Irishmen were so fed up with Ferguson that they decided to end the dispute over the horse with an out-of-court settlement before the case went to trial. This meant Ferguson walked away with $2.5 million in compensation, and in return he dropped the case for any future claims to the horse. But the Irishmen weren't done. Not wanting anything to do with Ferguson or the club, the two men then decided to sell their 27% stake in the club to the Glazers. This sale took the Glazers' stake in the club to 57%, effectively giving them a controlling interest. This meant that the Glazers now had enough ownership to effectively control the club's decisions, even though they didn't fully own the club. After this, a full takeover was inevitable. When the Glazers' stake at Manchester United surpassed 30%, by UK law they were legally required to buy out all remaining shareholders at the same price per share, and that's exactly what followed. Even though fan-led groups like Shareholders United resisted the Glazers' takeover, these groups groups held relatively small stakes at the club, meaning they held no real say on the major decisions at the club. The Glazers continued to gradually buy out the remaining shareholders, and by June 2005, the Glazers' stake had now risen to 75%. This allowed the Glazers to delist the club from the London Stock Exchange, and just like that, it was all over. Manchester United became a privately owned company under full control of the Glazers, and don't forget, they added over £500 million of debt onto the club using a leveraged buyout, a debt that still hasn't been paid till this day. In response to the Glazers' takeover, a select group of United fans formed a breakaway club named FC United of Manchester. The fans displayed their full discontent for the Glazers' takeover on their first visit to Old Trafford. The stadium was filled with protesting fans displaying banners that said "Love United" and "Hate the Glazers." The protests had gotten so out of hand, police were called in to manage the situation. It had gotten so bad that the Glazers had to be smuggled down the players' tunnel into a police van, just so that things didn't get too messy. In the end, United fans paid the ultimate price, and the Glazers continued to milk the club for all it was worth. It's crazy to me how a horse could have caused this much damage. That'll be it from me. If you guys did like this video, click subscribe, and if you want to see more videos like this, check out my last recent video on Crystal Palace.